Ethan Granger walked slowly through the sunny streets of Denton, a small forgotten town in the vast state of Texas. The heat made the asphalt feel like liquid, rippling beneath his feet as he walked aimlessly. That's how his life felt lately, directionless, purposeless. 2 years had passed since the accident that made him lose everything: his career as a police officer, his family, and above all, his desire to move forward. Since that day, all that was left was an empty routine filled with cigar. He isolated himself from people, preferring the silence of the streets to any human contact. After all, the grief and guilt he carried inside were difficult companions to abandon. The distant look, the shuffling walk, the unshaven beard. Ethan was no longer the determined, full-of-life man he once was. He was, in his own terms, just waiting for time to pass. That day, as he approached a small local bakery to buy his usual black coffee, he noticed something different. A child, no more than 8 years old, was standing on the sidewalk, watching him curiously. The girl's insistent gaze made Ethan frown. He tried to ignore her and move on, but before he could move away, the girl ran up to him and, with shaking hands, handed him a letter. "Please, can you give this to my father?" she said, almost in a whisper, her eyes wide and pleading. Ethan looked at the letter in the girl's hands. The envelope was simple, yellowed, with frayed edges as if it had been handled several times. Something about that situation made him hesitate. He opened his mouth to ask something, but the girl had already run away, disappearing into the crowd that was beginning to fill the streets. He stood still for a few moments, looking at the envelope. Part of him wanted to just throw it away, get on with his life, or what was left of it, without getting involved. But another part, one that he believed had died, felt a slight curiosity. Finally, he decided to open the letter. The first words left him confused. "Dear Daddy, I'm sorry I wasn't the daughter you wanted. I know it's my fault you left, but I wanted you to know that I love you anyway. I hope one day you can forgive me and go back home." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest as he read the girl's words. There was something painfully familiar about that guilt written in faded blue ink. He could almost hear the child's voice in his head, as if the apology itself was directed at him. That bothered him deeply. He looked around looking for signs of the girl, but she was gone. In the days that followed, Ethan couldn't get the letter out of his mind. He wondered who the father of that child was, what he had done to make her feel so guilty. The words brought back bitter memories of her own estrangement from her daughter, Emma, from whom he had left after the accident. The resentment between them had turned into a chasm, and Ethan found himself unable to cross it. Could it be that, in some way, that letter was a sign? A reminder that he also had a debt to settle with his. Still, something made him uneasy. The town was small and he had never seen the girl before. How did she know who he was or why she chose him to deliver that letter? Deciding to investigate, Ethan began asking questions around town, but no one seemed to know the girl. The more he searched, the more mysterious it became. The answers didn't come, and the letter became an anchor in Ethan's mind, pulling him into deeper waters of doubt and regret. One afternoon, tired of his fruitless search, he went to the old city park, a place where he used to take Emma when she was little. He sat down on one of the rusty swings, eyes fixed on the horizon, and held the letter once more. He reopened it and read it again, as if the words could somehow bring an answer. It was then that he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. In the bottom corner of the paper, almost erased, was a name written in small letters: Lily. With this new detail, Ethan decided he needed to find out more. He searched the city's records, talked to former professional colleagues, but the girl continued to be a mystery. At the same time, the investigation forced Ethan to look inward, at his own failure as a father and the unhealed wounds he had kept closed for so long. Every step he took seemed to snap him out of the numbness that had consumed him. Finally, after weeks of searching, he heard a story that changed everything. A lady who lived on the outskirts of the city told him about an old tragedy. About 5 years ago, a family had died in a fire in their house. Father, mother, and a daughter named Lily. Ethan, surprised, listened to the story carefully and felt a chill run down his spine. Lily was the same age as the girl he had seen on the sidewalk. Could it be a coincidence? Or was there something deeper going on? Ethan was intrigued and, for the first time in a long time, felt compelled to find the truth. His life, which had previously been driven by emptiness, now gained a new meaning. His search for answers about Lily and the letter led him to confront his past and perhaps seek the redemption he had so avoided. Over the next few days, Ethan dove headfirst into searching for answers. The story of Lily's family tragedy never left her mind. Was it possible that the girl who gave him the letter was the same one who had died in the fire? And if so, why him? Why, after so long, would she choose him to deliver that message? He knew he was getting himself into something that defied logic, but deep down, Ethan had always believed that the world held more secrets than met the eye. Maybe, in some way, that child was trying to come to terms with the past. Or maybe it was Ethan himself who needed to come to terms with his own. The nights began to be filled with strange dreams. He found himself surrounded by fire, hearing distant screams, and in the center of it all, the figure of a child watched him. Ethan would wake up with a start, sweat running down his face, but always with the same feeling. He needed to find out the truth. It was as if something bigger than himself was guiding his steps. The investigation led him to an old file in the basements of the local police station, where he used to work before the accident. He had friends who still owed him favors, and after some coaxing, he gained access to the records of the fire that destroyed Lily's house. As he leafed through the documents, he found disturbing details. The family had been declared dead, but the girl's body was never found among the rubble. Officially, the case had been dismissed as an accident, but a footnote Ethan felt his stomach drop as he read that. An arson? Was it possible that someone had deliberately caused the death of Lily's family? And if that were true, what had really happened to the girl? These questions haunted him as he left the police station that hot, silent afternoon. Desperate for more answers, Ethan decided to visit the site of Lily's old house, now just an empty lot, full of overgrown weeds and debris. He stood there, staring at the empty space, trying to imagine what the place would have been like before the tragedy. Everything was silent except for the wind that made the surrounding trees move, as if whispering ancient secrets. As he walked across the land, he found something partially buried in the earth. A small rag doll, old and torn, but visibly cared for. Ethan took the toy, feeling a chill as he held the object. Could it be Lily's? Was it another clue, or just a coincidence? He put the doll in his pocket and left quickly, feeling that more than ever he was being watched. That night the dreams returned. The fire, the screams, and now a growing sense of urgency. Ethan woke up suddenly with the feeling that something was about to happen. He looked around the room, the shadows cast by the streetlights coming through the thin curtains. It was then that he heard a sound, a light scratching at the front door. Cautiously, Ethan got up and grabbed a flashlight. When he opened the door, he found a small, familiar figure. The same girl who had given him the letter, Lily, was there, standing on the porch. Her eyes sparkled in the flashlight light, but there was something different about her. Something Ethan couldn't understand. "You found the doll," she said calmly, pointing to Ethan's pocket. He took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. Who are you? What's going on?" Lily stared at him for a few seconds before responding, her voice low but firm. "I need you to help me. What happened to me and my family was not an accident." Her words made the world around Ethan spin. A shiver ran up his spine. He knew he was entering unknown and dangerous territory, but something about the way the girl spoke left him with no choice. He would need to move forward, even if it took him to places he would rather avoid. Lily began to tell her story. Little by little, Ethan discovered that the fire was not an accident. Lily's family had fallen in with dangerous people, and the fire was retaliation, revenge for an unpaid debt. Lily's mother knew the risk, but had not been able to protect her daughter in time. "I saw everything," Lily said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I was there and I couldn't do anything." The weight of what she was saying fell on Ethan like a ton of bricks. He felt his mind try to reject the idea, but at the same time, he knew that somehow it made sense. He remembered how helpless he felt in the accident that destroyed his life, unable to save the people he loved. Now this child was telling his own version of the hell he had been through. Ethan found himself faced with a dilemma. He could just ignore what Lily was saying, chalk it all up to his own troubled mind and go back to the lonely life he led. Or he could believe that something supernatural was at play, and that this child was asking him for help not just for herself but for himself. Determined to follow the truth to the end, Ethan asked Lily what he needed to do. Her response was blunt. Find whoever did this. Make them pay. The girl's words echoed inside Ethan, as if they lit a flame he didn't know still existed. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose. He knew what he needed to do. But the question that tormented him was, who would be willing to kill her and her family, and why? The search for justice and answers would take him to dangerous places. And as Ethan delved deeper into the investigation, he discovered that the dark world behind Lily's death was vaster and more complex than he ever imagined. His life, already marked by pain and regret, was about to take a dramatic turn. Ethan knew he was getting himself into something dangerous. From the moment he decided to help Lily, his life had changed radically. The apathy that had consumed him for years was beginning to give way to a strange sense of urgency, of mission. And even without knowing exactly what he would face, he was certain of one thing: he needed to discover the truth. Over the next few days, Ethan returned to the land where Lily's house had been destroyed. He investigated every inch of the place, as if hoping to find hidden clues amid the ruins. And indeed, something caught his attention. In the far corner of the plot, he found a partially buried piece of metal with burn marks but still legible. It was part of an old safe. When he opened it, a small stack of documents was inside, somehow surviving the fire. Among them, a series of bank records that seemed to. The name was not foreign to Ethan. Nathan Claymore controlled a number of businesses in the city, including some construction companies and commercial properties, and was known for financing political campaigns and community events. But what no one seemed to know was that Claymore's name also appeared in old corruption and money laundering cases investigated by the police. However, thanks to his influence, they had never been able to prove anything. Until now. Ethan knew that messing with someone like Claymore could spell trouble, and as much as he was willing to face whatever came, there was something at stake that made him uneasy. If Claymore was behind the fire, why would Lily's family have been involved with it? Would it be a debt, a threat, or something more sinister? Or, armed with the documents, Ethan went looking for answers. He used his old police contacts to confirm his suspicions, and, as he dug deeper, he realized that Claymore's power network went far beyond what he imagined. He had influence over City Hall, the court system, and even the police department. The fire that killed Lily's family wasn't just an accident or an isolated crime. It was part of something much bigger, something Ethan was just beginning to understand. But the turning point came one night while Ethan was reviewing documents in his small rented house. Lily's ragdoll sat on the table, a silent reminder of the promise she had made. He was so focused that he almost didn't hear the soft knock on the door. It was only when the knock repeated, louder this time, that he stood up. Upon opening the door, Ethan came across a woman. She looked exhausted, her face lined with worry lines, her hair disheveled. There was something familiar about her, but Ethan couldn't place it right away. "Are you Ethan Granger?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. Who are you?" "My name is Maya Collins," she said, her eyes fixed on his. I'm Lily's mother's sister." Ethan stood still. The shock of hearing Lily's name from someone in the family left him speechless for a moment. He opened the door completely, inviting her inside. Maya looked hesitant, as if the decision to look for Ethan had been difficult to make. But once inside, she started talking. "I know what you're trying to do," Maya began, sitting down at the table. "You're trying to find out what happened to my sister and Lily, and I came here to tell you to stop." Ethan frowned, confused. "Stop? Why? I'm close to finding out the truth." Maya shook her head, her face pale and tense. "There's no truth you want to find out, Ethan. I know what happened. I always have. My sister, she was involved in something dangerous. Claymore. He was a cruel, manipulative man. She got involved with him because of an old debt. She thought she could get out of it, but she was wrong. Claymore's name again made Ethan shiver. He was on the right path, but he still didn't fully understand it. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you report it?" Ethan asked, his voice harsher than he intended. "Do you think I didn't try?" she replied with an exasperated sigh. "Claymore has eyes and ears everywhere. I did what I could, but when Lily disappeared, I knew it was too late." The mention of Lily's disappearance gave Ethan pause. "Disappeared, but her body was never found, Maya. And I saw Lily." Maya looked at him, eyes wide. What are you saying?" Ethan hesitated but decided to tell. He explained about the letter, about the meeting with Lily and the revelations that the girl had brought to him. With each word, Maya seemed to grow paler, disbelief written all over her face. "Lily? No, she's dead, Ethan. It can't be," she said, her voice breaking. You must be imagining things." "I know what I saw, and I'm saying something happened to her. What if she didn't die in that fire? What if she's trying to tell us something?" Ethan insisted. Maya closed her eyes, struggling to absorb what she heard. She was on the verge of emotional collapse, but she also knew there was something beyond comprehension in this story, and that was when the unexpected event happened. Outside, they heard the sound of a car approaching at high speed. Ethan instinctively stood up and looked out the window, his heart racing. The car stopped abruptly in front of his house, and two men got out of it, with determined and hostile faces. He recognized one of the men as Claymore's henchman, someone he had crossed paths with before in his investigations. "Claymore knows you're messing around where you shouldn't, Granger," the man said, approaching with a threatening tone. Ethan looked at Maya and felt her panic reflected in his own eyes. There was no time to think, only to act. He pulled Maya by the hand and ran to the back door. They fled into the darkness of the night with Claymore's men close behind. The chase took Ethan and Maya through the dark streets of the city until they finally found shelter in an abandoned house on the outskirts. As they breathed heavily, hidden in the dark basement, Maya looked at Ethan with eyes full of fear and regret. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Claymore won't stop until he gets what he wants." Ethan, sweaty and exhausted, looked between her and Lily's doll, which he still held tightly in his hands. "I won't stop either. Not now." The basement where Ethan and Maya hid was cold and damp, the air smelling musty and abandoned. Ethan leaned against the rough concrete wall, trying to control his breathing as he stared out the dirty window. Claymore's men were close. He knew that the situation had become even more dangerous, and now his and Maya's lives hung in the balance. More than ever, he wondered what was really at stake. "We have to get out of here," Maya whispered, her eyes still wide with fear. "They will find us." Ethan nodded. He knew that staying there for too long would be suicidal. They needed a plan, something that would get them out of this situation. But more importantly, something that could dismantle Claymore's empire once and for all. He looked at the Lily doll in his hands, feeling a strange sense of connection, as if somehow the girl was with them, guiding him on his quest. "I have an idea," he said, looking at Maya with renewed determination. "But we need proof, and to do that we need to go back to Claymore's house." Maya's eyes widened. "Go back there? Are you crazy? He has armed security on every corner." "I know, but he also has secrets. If we can get anything that directly incriminates him, like financial records or anything that ties him to the fire, we can turn him over to the authorities. I still know some people who can help us, but we need solid evidence." Maya hesitated, but the urgency in Ethan's eyes was impossible to ignore. They didn't have many options, and Claymore would hunt them to the end. After a brief moment of silence, she finally agreed. "Okay, but we have to be quick. If Claymore finds out we're in his house, we're dead." Night fell as they prepared to storm the Claymore estate. Ethan, with his former police experience, knew how to avoid the simplest security systems. They dressed in dark clothes and left for Claymore's mansion, located on the outskirts of the city. It was an imposing building surrounded by a high iron fence, cameras and guards patrolling the perimeter. Adrenaline coursed through Ethan's veins as they crept through the shadows, approaching the back of the house. There was a service entrance where he believed they could enter without being seen. As they approached, they heard the muffled sound of voices coming from inside the mansion, mixed with the distant hum of the security system. With quick, precise movements, Ethan opened the small service door with a makeshift tool, and they entered the house. Maya's heart was pounding in her chest, and her hands were shaking slightly, but she tried to remain calm. Ethan led her through the silent hallways, footsteps echoing faintly on the marble floor. They needed to get to Claymore's office, where Ethan suspected he kept compromising documents. The office was on the second floor, and when they reached the door, Maya grabbed Ethan's arm. "What if he's here? What if we get caught?" Ethan looked into her eyes, trying to convey the confidence he himself didn't have. "We leave here with what we need, or we don't leave at all. Let's do this quickly." They entered the luxurious office. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the room with a cold glow. Expensive books lined the shelves, and a huge mahogany table occupied the center. Ethan went straight to the table, looking for any clue that might help. He started opening drawers while Maya looked nervously at the door. Suddenly, he found a thick file with the name of a Swiss bank. When he opened the document, his eyes widened when he saw the transfers of large sums of money, all linked to offshore accounts. More than that, there were mentions of payments made to erase high-risk debts. He knew this could be proof that Claymore was involved in something big, and possibly the fire that killed Lily's family. "This might be what we need," he said, showing the documents to Maya. But before they could leave, they heard a muffled sound behind them. The office door slowly opened, and Claymore walked in, a cruel smile plastered on his face. He was not alone. Two of his most imposing henchmen were with him, blocking any escape route. "So, Granger," Claymore said, his voice low and venomous, "I knew you were digging too hard, and now it looks like you found what you were looking for. But the problem with knowing too much is that, well, it tends to end badly." Ethan stood still for a moment, his eyes locked on Claymore's. He knew there was no easy way out of this situation. With a quick movement, Claymore waved to his men, who advanced on Ethan and Maya. An intense fight began, with Ethan trying to free himself from the henchman's heavy blows while Maya screamed for help. Amid the confusion, something unexpected happened. The mansion's lights flickered, and for a moment everything was completely silent. Then a low, clear voice echoed through the room, even though no one was speaking. "Daddy, why didn't you come back to me?" Lily's voice filled the space, and Claymore stopped mid-strike, his eyes wide with fear. He looked around as if expecting to see the girl there, but there was no one. "You promised you would protect me." Ethan, still trying to recover from the blows, felt a shiver run up his spine. It was the same voice he had heard in his dreams, and now it was there, in front of them all. Claymore, visibly distraught, began to back away. His henchmen, confused, also stopped for a moment, not knowing what to do. Lily's doll, which Ethan was still holding, seemed to pulse in his hand as if it were alive. Suddenly, the room turned ice cold, and an invisible force seemed to push the Claymore men away. Claymore, now completely terrified, fell to his knees, muttering something about ghosts and revenge. Ethan didn't know what was going on, but he took advantage of the opportunity. He grabbed Maya by the hand and ran out of the office, the documents under his arm. They went downstairs and managed to escape the mansion, while Claymore's men were still trying to understand what had just happened. Outside under the moonlight, Ethan looked at Maya, who was out of breath and in shock. "What was that? What happened in there?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan shook his head, still trying to process. "I don't know, but I think Lily was with us, and somehow she did what we needed to do to get out of there." The night in Denton was colder than usual, and Ethan felt the biting wind on his skin as he and Maya ran through the dark streets. They had managed to escape Claymore's mansion, but the adrenaline was still coursing through their veins. Every step was a reminder that they were being hunted. Claymore wouldn't give up easily. The document Ethan had obtained could kill him, but now they needed to find a way to hand it over to the authorities without getting caught. As they ran towards the car that Ethan had left parked on a further street, he looked at Lily's doll in his hands. That feeling that Lily was with them, protecting them, was still strong. And that gave him the strength to continue. "We have to take these documents to the police. They could still do something with this," Ethan said, panting. Maya looked at him, fear mixed with hope in her gaze. "Are you sure you can still trust anyone in the police? Claymore has a lot of allies in there." "I know who to look for," Not everyone is under his control, Ethan said firmly. He was thinking about an old colleague, Detective Wilson, who had always been one of the few men he trusted completely. Wilson knew about the accident that took Ethan's family and had always offered support even when Ethan withdrew from the world. If anyone could help, it was him. They got into the car, and Ethan sped toward Wilson's house, which was on the outskirts of town. The streets were deserted, which only increased the tension in the air. The silence seemed so thick that every rustle of the trees in the wind sounded like an alarm. When they arrived at Wilson's house, Ethan got out of the car, feeling the weight of the moment. He knocked on the door, and Wilson, still a little drowsy, opened it right away. The detective, a burly, gray-haired man, frowned at seeing Ethan and Maya so late at night, clearly shaken. "Granger, what's going on?" asked Wilson, trying to process the situation. "I need your help, Wilson," Ethan said bluntly. "Claymore was involved in the fire that killed Lily and her family. I have proof of that. But we're being chased, and if he finds out we're here, we're dead." Wilson was silent for a moment, but his face hardened upon hearing Claymore's name. He had already heard rumors about the businessman's dirty dealings, but had never had enough proof to act. Now, with Ethan and the documents in his hands, it was a different story. "Come in," said Wilson, opening the door wider. As soon as they entered, Ethan began to explain everything. The letter, the investigation, the chase, and even Lily's mysterious presence at critical moments. As he spoke, Wilson reviewed the documents carefully, nodding his head in approval. "That's more than enough to take him down," Wilson said, looking at Ethan. "But we need to act fast. If Claymore finds out I'm involved, he might try to shut me up too. I'll need to involve the Justice Department and the media. He can't hide from both." Ethan agreed. But before they could plan their next steps, the sound of tires screeching on the asphalt outside caused everyone to freeze. Maya, who was sitting on the sofa, quickly got up. Ethan went to the window and peered out, seeing 2 black cars parked on the street in front of Wilson's house. It was Claymore. "He found us," Ethan whispered, tension building in the air. Wilson ran to the closet and pulled out a gun. "Let's prepare, they can't come in here and get away with it." But before they could react, one of Claymore's henchmen kicked the door, knocking it down hard. The confrontation was immediate. Wilson fired to secure the entrance while Ethan and Maya hid behind furniture, trying to avoid the line of fire. The sound of gunshots echoed through the house, and the tension reached its limit, and it was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Lily's doll, which was on the coffee table, fell to the floor during the confusion, and suddenly, an icy presence filled the room. The lights began to flicker, and time seemed to slow down for a brief moment. Ethan felt the air grow thick, as if he was about to witness something beyond comprehension. Suddenly, Claymore's henchmen, who were advancing through the house, stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide. A figure formed before them, an ethereal-looking girl dressed in a simple white dress, her dark hair falling around her shoulders. It was Lily. But not as Ethan had seen her before. She seemed more real, more present. His eyes glowed with a frightening intensity. "Why did you do this to my family?" Her voice echoed through the room like silent thunder that struck the heart of every person there. Claymore's henchmen were paralyzed, unable to react. Claymore, who had just entered the house, froze upon seeing Lily. His eyes were filled with terror, and he began to mumble disjointed words. I had no choice. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." But Lily didn't seem to hear his excuses. She just continued to stare at him, her gaze filled with a mix of pain and fury. "You destroyed my life. You destroyed my mother's life. Now you will pay." Before anyone could understand what was happening, a wave of energy coursed through the room, knocking Claymore and his men to the ground. It was as if Lily's very presence was draining their strength, subduing them in a way no human could. Claymore, now powerless, fell to his knees, his eyes glassy and his breathing labored. Ethan, Maya, and Wilson watched everything in silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. Lily's presence dominated the space, and, in one last movement, she approached Claymore, extending her hand toward him. The terrified man backed away, but knew there was nowhere else to run. Lily, with a calm expression, whispered, It's over. And in the blink of an eye, she was gone. Silence took over the house. Claymore was lying on the ground, defeated, unable to move. His henchmen were passed out or unconscious. Ethan, still stunned, looked at Wilson, who was equally in shock. Maya began to cry softly, relieved and scared at the same time. Ethan stood up, still holding Lily's doll, and slowly walked over to Claymore. The man, broken and without strength, just looked at him with despair in his eyes. "She gave you a chance, Claymore," Ethan said, his voice firm. "Now you will face justice." Finally, with Claymore defeated and the evidence in hand, Ethan and Wilson were able to hand over the documents to the authorities and involve the press. Claymore was arrested, and his corrupt connections began to fall apart. Justice was finally being served. But for Ethan, the weight of this journey was deeper. A few days later, he returned to the land where Lily's house stood. The wind was blowing gently and the sun was shining in the sky, as if the world was at peace again. Ethan placed Lily's doll on the floor, in front of what was left of the house, and stayed there for a few minutes, in silence. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered, feeling a light breeze brush past his face. As he walked back to his car, he knew something had changed, not just for Lily, but for him too. Ethan felt like he could finally move on. Days have passed since the fall of Claymore, and the city of Denton began to feel the impacts of the revelations. Nathan Claymore's arrest caused a domino effect, bringing down key figures involved in his corrupt schemes. Local newspapers carried headlines about the fraud and arson that claimed the lives of Lily's family. Finally, justice was being served, and Ethan Granger, the man who had walked away from everything after the loss of his own family, was now seen as a silent hero, the one who, but for Ethan, public glory was insignificant. The real relief came from the feeling that he had somehow kept a promise, both to Lily and to himself. He felt that, by helping that child, he had also helped himself out of the abyss in which he had been trapped for years. He couldn't explain what had really happened that night at Claymore's house. The world around him preferred to rationalize events. Force of suggestion, collective psychological phenomenon, some said. But Ethan knew the truth was deeper. Lily, in some way, was present every step of this journey, and the bond between them transcended simple explanations. The city was returning to its rhythm, but Ethan still needed a moment of silence, time to process everything he had experienced. One morning, he decided to make one last visit to the cemetery where Lily's mother had been buried, in a modest area on the outskirts of town. The tomb was simple, a granite tombstone with few words engraved on it. He crouched before the tombstone, his fingers tracing the letters etched into the cold marble. "Here lies Megan Collins, loving and courageous mother." Below, a small message. "May love transcend time and loss." With Lily's ragdoll in hand, Ethan stood there for a while, letting silence fill the space. He closed his eyes, allowing the memories of everything that had happened to pass through his mind. And then he felt something. Not a physical presence, but an inner peace. A light breeze blew, bringing with it a feeling of farewell. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, a soft smile on his face. He knew that Lily was somehow at peace now. And he also began to feel this peace. With one last look at the grave, Ethan placed the doll next to the tombstone as a tribute. The small doll, its threads already frayed, looked strangely out of place in the formal setting of the cemetery. But for him, it represented the final link between the past and the future, a conclusion to a story that had transcended life and death. Ethan stood up, walking slowly to the cemetery gate. He felt that something in his heart had changed. For the first time in a long time, the weight of grief he had carried for so long was lifted. He had faced his ghosts, both real and imagined, and had come out stronger. Over the next few months, Ethan began to rebuild his life. The relationship with your daughter Emma, who had been so shaken after the accident, also began to heal. He sought her out, determined not to let the past define the future. The journey he had experienced with Lily and the weight of not being there for Emma gave him a new perspective. He knew it was time to repair the wounds that still existed between them. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Ethan saw Emma for the first time in months. She was sitting on a bench, her blonde hair blowing in the wind, her clear eyes scanning the horizon. Ethan approached, his heart pounding. When she saw him, her eyes reflected a mixture of surprise and restrained emotion. "Ethan?" she asked, using his first name, something she started doing after the distance between them. He smiled softly. "Hi, Emma, I thought maybe we could talk." She looked at him for a long moment before nodding, and wordlessly, Ethan sat down next to her. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was as if they were both waiting for the right moment to start. And when the moment arrived, it was Emma who spoke first. "I miss you, Dad," she said, breaking the barrier of pride that had separated them for so long. Ethan, with tears in his eyes, nodded. "Me too, daughter, and I want to make it right. I want to be here for you." They talked for hours on that park bench about the past, the heartaches, and the hopes for the future. It was a small but significant step in repairing something they had both lost. And for Ethan, it was another victory, a silent redemption. A few years passed. Ethan never heard from Lily again, but he knew she was at peace. Claymore was convicted, and his corruption network dismantled. Denton was now a quieter town, far from the shadows of the past. Ethan, in turn, found a new purpose. With his experience and determination, he began working as a private investigator, helping people who, like he once were, needed a second chance. He reconnected with his daughter, and they both began to rebuild the relationship they had lost. But whenever the wind blew softly and suddenly, Ethan couldn't help but remember the breeze in the cemetery, the sense of peace he'd felt that day. And in her heart, she knew that somehow, Lily would always be there, not as a ghost, but as a living reminder that the past, no matter how painful, can be overcome. With his eyes on the horizon and the future ahead, Ethan Granger, a man marked by loss and redemption, finally felt like his journey was complete. 5 years later, Ethan Granger was still walking the streets of Denton, but now with a renewed purpose. The weather that morning was mild, and the golden sun illuminated the sidewalks. The weight he had carried for so many years had dissipated, replaced by a lightness he had never imagined feeling again. His life took a new direction. Working as a private investigator had given him the chance to help people and find justice where there had previously been only shadows. He had transformed into someone who gave others hope, just as Lily had given him hope. His relationship with Emma also blossomed. They had gone from shy conversations to a more solid and affectionate relationship, although they were still building the lost bonds. That weekend, Ethan planned to visit her in Austin, where she had moved to work as a photographer. The wounds of the past hadn't been completely erased, but they were healing, and that was enough. As he prepared to leave, Ethan stopped in front of a small bookcase in the living room of his house. At the top, in a special place, was Lily's doll, now framed in a glass case, as a reminder of everything she had experienced. He looked at the object for a moment, a small smile appearing on his lips. Lily had been more than an apparition. She had been a symbol of redemption, not just for herself, but for him as well. And now, as he lived his new life, he knew that that girl's spirit would, in some way, always be with him. With the gentle breeze coming through the window, Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the present and the future intertwine in harmony. And for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to be completely at peace.